What's going on, mi gente? It's Diego Montalvan back to analyze another country from conmebol right before the qualifiers. Today, to help me analyze a little bit of Argentina's qualifying campaign is Peter Coach from Golazo, Argentina. Hey, Peter, how's it going?
Hey, Diego. Pleasure to be with you to talk a little bit about Argentina.
Now, obviously, Argentina sit comfortably in second place, already qualified. But this campaign, how would you grade it? What are the positives?
I mean, frankly, you have to look at the whole thing and say it's an overwhelming positive because you need to put into context. I think it's easy now to look at where Argentina are and say, well, it's Argentina. They've got a great squad. They should be qualifying relatively easily along with Brazil. But you need to look at Argentina when Lionel Scaloni took over after the World Cup in 2018. They were a mess. The World Cup was a disaster. I think they were quite fortunate even to get how far they did and to kind of put in a half decent display against France. But otherwise, it was an absolute disaster. There was players coming to the end of their international careers, that we saw a lot of those senior players being phased out. And when Lionel Scaloni came in, a guy with almost no experience, was very much seen as, well, he's being appointed because he's the cheaper option for the AFA because they can't go and get Simeone, Pochettino, some of the big Argentine coaches. I think a lot of people would have looked at this qualifying, especially after how difficult the last one was, and thought, maybe this is the time Argentina don't make it to a World Cup. It wouldn't have been beyond the round. So for us to be here several games before the end, Argentina already booked their place, having not lost, having ended the long wait for an international trophy is unimaginable. And it's really difficult to even look at a negative, to be frank, because there's been this new group of players that have come in, have created this really solid core. The atmosphere in the squad is better than we've seen for years. And yeah, they've ticked all the boxes. They've cruised through qualification. They're unbeaten in almost a record-breaking amount of games. And yeah, I mean, I think they're in such good shape heading into a World Cup.
So how would you grade it?
Well, I mean, if you're going to go in terms of grades, like it's an A. It's an A plus. I mean, as I said, you can't really look at a negative from it and say, oh well, they could have won that game when they drew, for example. I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
as I said, for all those reasons before, winning a trophy, cruising through qualification unbeaten. Okay, Brazil are above them in the table, but what does that really matter? It's an overwhelming success.
You mentioned, I think a key piece was the hiring of the new coach, right, Lionel Scaloni. But for you, was there a key moment during this qualifying campaign where you finally said, oh, Argentina can make it back to the World Cup. Argentina is getting better. Argentina is, meeting up to the standards of what Argentinians want.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe when the Copa America, when the one before the one they won, when they got to the semi-finals and lost to Brazil, I think at that stage you could say, you know what, there's obviously a big improvement here from where we were before. There's now actually a platform for them to build, and there's been young players now that are coming into the team and are making a difference. But away from the qualifiers, I think the overwhelmingly key point in this recent history for Argentina is winning the Copa America, because what that's done is given them this release and this huge boost in confidence, because that pressure hanging over the players, particularly some of the older players that have gone through those previous Copa America final defeats, World Cup final defeat, the embarrassment almost of not reaching the 2018 World Cup, then the World Cup in 2018, which, as I said, was a disaster. For all those players, they were looking at this as, oh my God, I'm going to end my international career with absolutely nothing to show for it, despite having 20 plus years of this conveyor belt of talent. It's easy to forget that at the end of the 90s to early 2000s, this was a nation that was producing under 20 team after under 20 team that was the best in the world and had nothing to show for it in the end. So people are still going to look back and say, oh, they only picked up one Copa America. It's not what it should have been. But I think for the players involved in that squad, it was a relief. It was this weight off the shoulders. And it then gave them this renewed belief to go into the rest of the qualifying as, you know what, we're the best team in South America. And Brazil can be top of the group, but we've just beaten Brazil in Brazil to lift a Copa America. We shouldn't be fearing anyone. If we can do that with Brazil's home record, then we can go and beat anyone. And I think they've been able to carry that momentum through the rest of the qualifying and hopefully take that to Qatar for the World Cup.
Absolutely, absolutely. As you mentioned, they're still undefeated during this qualifying campaign. But is there any game for you that should have been a loss?
Just trying to think back to the games. I mean, there's been some tough games as you'd expect. I mean, conmebol qualifying is arguably the toughest in the world. I mean, when you look back at having even the lesser teams in conmebol qualifying, when you have to go away to them, it's a really tricky game. You can't even look at Venezuela or Bolivia and say, oh, okay, easy 6 points over the course of the qualifying. And Argentina have found that out in recent years. I don't know if I can think back to a specific game where I think Argentina were fortunate to come away with it, but certainly there's been a huge amount of games which have been highly competitive. And I think, again, that ties back into the difference in the mentality and how difficult Argentina have come to be, how difficult it is to beat Argentina now. And that's, again, down to not just Lionel Scaloni, but some of the changes that he's brought in and the difference that they've made, notably at the back, Emi Martinez and Cristian Romero. Those two particularly coming into the first team and immediately making such a difference has made Argentina so much more formidable. And games where maybe they would have lost in the past, they've just been solid. They've been able to keep teams out. So yeah, without being able to mention anything specifically, there has been a lot of difficult games, but that's the difference now. Argentina maybe in the past would have lost them and now are at least able to get draws.
Right, that mind frame that you mentioned. Well, you also mentioned some players, but I want to know, is there any player for you that stood out so far during this qualifying campaign for Argentina?
Yeah, and I think this is the other really key point, I think, in the Scaloni era, that previously, if you asked anyone in that question, they're going to be like, well, Messi, and Messi almost alone, because it was that important that Argentina leaned on him. Certainly that was the case going into 2018, where he was the man responsible really for taking Argentina to the World Cup. I think the really key difference now, when we look at this qualifying period, is the amount other players have really risen up. And I look at particularly the midfield. When you look at the influence of Rodrigo de Paul, who's now undoubtedly one of the leaders in the team, seems to produce outstanding performance every time he puts on the shirt. He wears that kind of responsibility as being one of the leaders in the team. I think Leandro Paredes as well has been, since day one for Scaloni, one of the key men. He barely misses a game. He's the man that Scaloni looks to at the base of the midfield. So I think those two, Lautaro Martinez has well and truly answered any questions about who should be leading the line for Argentina. When he came into the team, Aguero was still there. People were wondering, do you play them both? Which one if you play one? Now there's no question. And then in defense, those players that I mentioned, particularly Martinez in goal, who's answered the big question there about Argentina's tricky goalkeeper position, and Romero, who's suddenly transformed almost the entire defense into looking like a really functional unit. Whereas before it was always, you watched Argentina through your fingers thinking, I'm not sure they'll be able to keep a clean sheet here. And now players that were once really in that category, like Otamendi, people look at it and say, oh, now he looks pretty good.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that last part with the defense, because you definitely weren't sure that they could keep a clean sheet. But now that's changed. The mentality's changed. Like you said, it feels like a weight has been lifted off of many of their shoulders after that Copa America win. What needs to be done for the next qualifiers to get this Argentina group, I don't know, maybe ahead of Brazil now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know realistic whether that will happen anyway. And I don't know if it really matters. I think they would like to at least keep that unbeaten run going for as long as possible. However, they go into these last two games, obviously qualified. They're going to be missing a number of key players. A lot of those players that I just mentioned. Lautaro Martinez is COVID positive, so he's not coming. Romero and Martinez are suspended after the fiasco in Brazil. So I think it's more than anything this time, not so much, oh, we need to go and get 6 points. That doesn't really matter. But I think the key thing in this round of World Cup qualifiers for Argentina is it's an opportunity with those players missing for Lionel Scaloni to look at other players, because I think his squad for the World Cup, if everyone's fit, is probably more than 80% done. I think he knows who he would take. But for a couple of those positions, maybe he is still unsure about. Maybe up front is one of them. Who would be the backup to Lautaro Martinez? Well, this week, these 2 games, may be a good idea to find out who that will be, because he's going to have to play someone else and kind of see who stands up in that role. Maybe Julian Alvarez is an option, but it's a big call, and it's a big loss to not have Lautaro. So that's really interesting, as is the goalkeeper position, whether he's going to stick with Franco Armani, whether he gives Juan Musso an opportunity to see who will be the backup, the undisputed backup to Emi Martinez, and again in central defense as well. So I think that's the big thing really for these 2 games, is which players are going to take the opportunity if they do get some time on the pitch to say, hey, I should be in that squad to go to Qatar.
I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, yeah, these last 2 games, Argentina versus Venezuela in Argentina, and then Argentina traveling away to Ecuador, correct? Do you think they can keep the undefeated record alive for them?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think home against Venezuela, even with players missing, I think it's going to be a something of a party atmosphere, being it's the last home qualifier at La Bombonera, which will be a great atmosphere. And I think a lot of those players, as I said, a lot of those players will have something to play for. They're not there just to soak up the atmosphere and look around and say, this is great, we've done a great job, we're the champions of the South America, we've qualified. Some of them will be there to say, I need to put in a really good performance to make sure I'm on the plane to Qatar. So they should win there. And I think the Ecuador game could be difficult. I mean, if Ecuador were to lose against Paraguay in their penultimate game, which you wouldn't necessarily expect given how Paraguay are playing, but if they were, then they would still need probably to pick up points in that final game just to make absolutely certain, at least that they don't drop down into 5th. So that would make it a bit more complicated. But no, I think certainly it's 2 games that ordinarily Argentina would look at and say we can go and get 6 points and finish on a real high point.
Perfect. Peter, I want to say thank you for your time. I want to know if you have any closing comments and let people know where they can find you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. No, I mean, Golazo Argentina on Twitter is where I would put anything that I say or do. So just go to Twitter and you'll see me there.
Perfect. Well, guys, thank you so much. Again, we've covered 1 more nation from CONMEBOL. We got 9 more. So please comment, like, and subscribe.